So, as always, hopefully you have watched the lessons in chronological order and you haven't just, skipped through the course, jumped straight to the entry section. I want to get into a trade. How do I do it? And you're now hearing my voice and watching this lesson. The course is specifically and heavily designed to be obviously watched in order. In the Liquidity 3.0 module, we have covered those lower time frame or your entry models in depth. Okay, so please make sure you have watched that and worked through all of that before you come to here. This sort of lesson here is more of a kind of higher level overview of sort of the differences in sort of the high level approach of what we're doing here. And essentially just we can split them up between what we call a risk entry and a confirmation entry. Now I won't get too caught up in the names of all of these things, but it will hopefully make a little bit of sense as we dive into it. So the general sort of philosophy of what we're doing with our trade plan and how we want to trade, right, is medium time frame / high time frame ideas, direction, POIs. And then once price gets to there, and we've done all the hard work with using our medium time frame and high time frame to see where price may be going next, we're then using our lower time frame of choice to simply help us time our medium time frame movement. Okay, we're not just sitting on here looking for entries all day. So let's talk about confirmation entries first, because that's basically what the focus has been this whole time through the course, right? We do our hard work on the high time frame and our medium time frame. We get our structure, our POIs, we wait for price to pull in, and we set our alerts at that POI, okay? Once our alerts go off, as we've spoken about at length, we then look on our lower time frame for our entry models. Now, generally what we've been looking for is that first initial entry. All right, so imagine you get the strong liquidation of the equal lows, the medium time frame mitigation, V-shaped reaction, you get the PBL fail, the chock. Now you have your zone to enter on, right? And essentially what we're calling that is a confirmation entry just because it confirms our medium time frame POI is holding, okay? So we just call that a confirmation entry. What we haven't really spoken about so much is just sometimes, you'll get that level hold and whether you take the trade there or not, and then you'll get like another lower time frame break of structure, okay? And then that can give you another POI to enter on. And essentially we just call that the double confirmation entry. But again, I wouldn't get too caught up in the exact names. I generally just refer to this all as confirmation entry, okay? So for the most part, we've just been focusing on that initial entry, but a lot of the times you'll see, you start to just form those chains or another entry on the lower time frame, and then you can look to get involved here with even more confirmation. At that point, you might not necessarily need to see an entire liquidity entry model again because you've already seen that. You're kind of just trying to follow order flow now and get in. So that's pretty much confirmation entries, which is what we've been looking at the whole way through the course. We wait for our medium time frame POI mitigation. Okay, a mitigation of a refined lower time frame POI is added confluence only, not strict criteria. So what on earth does that mean? What that means is when you're looking at, say, your medium time frame POI, right? If you want to go and investigate down in here and you look left within, so imagine your medium time frame POI is your M15 time frame, right? And then if you look down on the M1 in here, what you'll find is probably M1 zones, right, to the left, and you can drag these across. Now, when price comes into your medium time frame POI, right, if it gives the entry model without hitting a refined lower time frame POI within it, that's fine. And that's why I say it's just added confluence. So like imagine this move came into here, mitigated our refined lower time frame level, and then gave the entry model. It's just a nice added confluence that it's hit that. But for me, it's not a strict criteria, okay? So if price comes in, misses our refined lower time frame POI within here, and then gives the entry model, that's cool, I'm going to get involved. It's just if it hits this, that's just an added bonus, okay? So hopefully that makes sense. And yeah, once we get our medium time frame POI mitigation, we look for our lower time frame entry model, right? We've covered this at length in the previous lessons. And essentially the confirmation entry is just pretty much that first entry. And then, if you get like another break, another POI, that would be your DC. Or sometimes, you could see price come into your level and then just give like a little chock down here, right? You might want to call that a CE off of the extreme, or you want to call that a DCE. And do you know what I mean? This is why I don't get too caught up in the names. It's just a confirmation entry for me, really, for the most part. Okay, so that's pretty much what I trade the majority of the time. But what you may also want to consider is what we call risk entries. And that's essentially where you just enter pretty much directly on your medium time frame POI. So again, remember, what are we doing this whole time? Medium time frame POIs are all we care about, right? That's the idea, that's the philosophy, that's what we're trading. But then once price gets there, we're simply using our lower time frame for execution just to confirm that this POI is holding. It's just a little bit of layer of extra confluence. and it may be holding, right? And price isn't just going to smash through. And of course, it also, it gives us increased risk reward because we can have smaller stop losses for the most part. But you may not always want to do that, right? Sometimes it can be worth just setting your limit here for obvious benefits. You might not be able to be on the charts all day, and you can leave your order here. It might be easier in your psychology. It might suit your personality more. You may just want to add it to your portfolio anyway, because sometimes, right, price will come in and it might not give you the perfect entry model. You might miss it for whatever reason. So some people like to take both. They'll set their limit here, and they'll also take the confirmation entry, right? There's whatever way you want to cut it, the world is your oyster, but these are the types of basically ways we define it. Now, you kind of got real two options with risk entries. You can either literally just enter on the POI directly, right? Whether you want to enter on the edge or the halfway point. We'll talk about this in the next lesson. Or you can go and investigate, like I was talking about earlier, look left on your lower time frame at how your medium time frame POI was formed. So imagine your medium time frame is the M15. As price is coming down, you could drop down to say like the M1 or the M5 and look in here and find if there are some zones, right? And you can refine that. Okay, and we'll talk about this in a bit more detail in a minute. But that's essentially a risk entry where you just enter directly in the POI as price is coming back. You don't wait for it to hold and then look for your lower time frame entry. Okay, so if you are going to take risk entries, generally you want to be doing it on what you deem to be, a high probability medium time frame POI, where you have pretty high conviction that we're going to go, and you don't really need to wait for that extra confirmation. Okay, so obviously that's kind of what I tried to say here. You want to be using it on those medium time frame extremes, so near strong lows ideally. It doesn't have to be, but ideally, or like, if you're going to trade from a risk entry up here on the medium time frame, ideally you want it to be like a flip. So imagine there's a supply zone here, and like price comes up and then like sweeps, and you get a medium time frame flip that sweeps liquidity and price is coming back. That may be a time where you might want to consider trading in here, right? With a risk entry if it's not the extreme. And generally you want to be doing it when it's pro order flow and pro trend if you're going to be taking those risk entries, okay? Otherwise, if you're not deeming it to be as high probability, that's where you may want to wait for that confirmation entry, just so you can actually see price is potentially holding that medium time frame POI, right? And yeah, so they're the two differences. We'll go on the charts in a little bit and just show those, but I did just want to go a little bit more depth into risk entries before then. So as I touched on with risk entries, we generally want to be doing this when we have high conviction on higher time frame POI. So if we just quickly look at the high level trade plan, essentially what you're doing, right, is these medium time frame POIs. Obviously when price gets into there, that's when our alerts go off, and that's typically then when we would drop down to our lower time frame, right, to look for those confirmation entries. Now what you could do is just enter directly on the POI. So whether you just enter on the medium time frame POI itself directly like that, or you go and look left within here, which is what we're about to dive into, right? And you look for a lower time frame zone within there, and obviously then you can refine your level a little bit more. So the times in which you want to potentially consider risk entries are generally when you have pretty high conviction. So i.e. we mitigate a higher time frame POI, we know there's a strong possibility we're now getting that pullback, you've waited for the medium time frame structure to shift, so now you're playing, or if you're shorting from here, you are pro your medium time frame, at least order flow, right? It could be in line with the swing or in line with internal, but at least you know you're trading from somewhat of a strong high there, right? This is the extreme. Ideally, it's a flip. Even better if it sweeps liquidity, right? You have a lot of conviction that this is a high probability POI. You're not just like, entering short from one down here, right? You have high conviction. Or even better, you wait for that to be mitigated. You wait for like a chalk or an IBOS in here, and then you take a risk entry on that medium time frame POI, right? You want to be doing it when you kind of have high conviction with the trend or with order flow. That's so much better. Rather than, let's imagine like, you've got medium time frame low down here, and then this is a medium time frame zone, right? So technically, well, imagine it was like here, right, where this structure is. You don't really want to be taking a risk entry long here so much, because it's like counter order flow or counter trend. It's kind of in the middle of the leg. It's not really in anywhere. So you want to be doing it in those areas of which are high probability as possible, okay? So like, i.e. here would be high probability because we mitigated the higher time frame extreme. We're expecting the next movement. Your medium time frame order flow is now in line. Like this is a flip. It'd be even better if it swept liquidity, right? You have high conviction that you want to get in here. That's the type of time to take a risk entry here. This wouldn't be. Why wouldn't you want to take a risk entry here? Well, because you're trading against the swing. After we've mitigated the extreme, you're trading against order flow, right? Because we've shifted bullish to get there. So this is just a reaction points for pullbacks, right? Because order flow is now bullish and you're trying to short against that. So I would not really deem that to be high probability to take a risk entry. You want to be focusing on those high probability POIs, okay? So for the most part, if you're going to set a refined risk entry, and what I mean by that is where you look for the lower time frame zones within your higher time frame zone, very often when you go dig in here, like imagine again, your medium time frame is the M15. If you go and look on the M5 or the M1 within this leg, not always, but very often there will be multiple lower time frame POIs like I've drawn here when you go and investigate in the left, okay? So imagine this section of price action in orange, right, is the lower time frame bit here of your higher time frame POI. Hopefully that makes sense, right? And very often, but not always, there'll be multiple lower time frame POIs to choose from, right? So which one do you pick? Because you could take loads of losses. So generally, there's kind of two sort of setups, I guess you could say, for refined risk entries. I would say the most times, if I am going to consider a risk entry, it's going to be on the refined extreme, okay? Because if I take a loss here, well then, I only have to take one trade. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. Because then if that fails, it's at the extreme, well then demand has failed, right? The medium time frame demand's failed, structure's probably shifting, I only have to be wrong once. Whereas if I take a loss here and a loss here, that's 3 times, I could potentially lose. So generally entering on the extremes for risk entries is, I would say 8 or 9 times out of 10, that's where I'm going to be entering if I'm going to consider a risk entry. And also generally you want it to be like, a low that forms through a sweep of liquidity. So as we know, strong lows, how do they typically form, right? We know that they are at the extremes, they broke structure. But then if you look at a lower time frame, very often there will be a sweep of liquidity, right? We talked about this in the high and low resistance lesson in the liquidity module, where typically that's how protected structure is formed. It's formed through a sweep of liquidity. So even better if you can see that in the lower time frame, right, for your POI. So that one's pretty simple. It's just you either enter directly here. Generally, you're going to be doing it from those medium time frame extreme POIs anyway. And if you want to refine it even further, generally I'm going to refine it to like the M5 or the M1 extreme if I'm trading an M15 POI. Okay, so that one's quite simple. Sometimes there will be POIs kind of, not at the extreme, but like, further in the middle of the zone, the medium time frame POI. So that's where it gets a little bit more tricky and a lot more advanced because, well, you're entering in the middle, right? So typically if I'm going to do that, I generally want it to be a sweep flip. So I want it to be a flip that swept liquidity, okay? And really ideally it's when you kind of see those multiple mitigations so that this flip here, so obviously this is like say the M1 or the M5, it mitigates demand, we come into supply there, we then sweep liquidity, we mitigate demand again, right? So you're seeing that series of mitigations, that demand chain form, right? And then we move to the upside. So although this POI, this refined lower time frame POI is sort of in the middle of the medium time frame POI, right? So we're not entering down at the extreme. At least there's a lot of confluence to suggest that, this is probably going to be the last price that's going to hold because it's essentially the mitigated extreme because these are all mitigated. So this makes a lot of sense. And that's why I want it to be generally I want it to be a sweep flip. Okay. If it has, that lower time frame inducement as well, then even better. For me, that's not a strict requirement, but this pretty much is. I want it to be a flip that's about liquidity and ideally at least had one mitigation behind it. So I can kind of see, that sustained order flow. So if I can simplify it even more, if you're going to take a refined lower time frame POI as a risk entry, generally you want it to be what you think is a mitigated extreme for the most part. So, like technically you could say that this is the extreme zone, but it's already been mitigated. We can see the series of mitigations. This is the flip that swept, right? It can make a lot of sense to take here. So I would say for the most part, this is a little bit more advanced. So, don't just jump into taking these straight away. For the most part, if you wait for confirmation entries, at least you've got, price coming in and confirming that it wants to hold, get the liquidity entry model, et cetera, et cetera. So these are a bit more advanced. And really it comes down to having very good POI selection, having a good read on your medium time frame and high time frames to know when you just want to get involved. And this can kind of help you with that. But generally, look for POIs that have swept liquidity at extremes. You want to be doing it pro order flow, pro trend, and then same sort of rules apply when you're looking on the lower time frames, okay? Cool. So let's go and take a look at some of these examples on the charts.